very, very proud of her egg.
Yeah.
Or
Here,
they're
girls,
in her
top
nesting
that.
box.
Or they're fighting over a nesting box, Lydia says.
They get really angry when that happens.
Yeah. So, Jacob is, I wouldn't say having the worst night of his life, but he is on the peak of worry about what his future might bring. And I say that knowing when you're young and have no attachments, and you're setting out like he did after being blessed by his father and stealing his brother's birthright, and his mom sends him away, and he's camping at Bethel, and he doesn't know what his future might bring. I remember being young and not knowing where I'm going to be tomorrow did not worry me nearly as much as it does now. And when you had zero responsibilities and zero possessions, in some ways, you're able to live a little bit carefree. In some ways. There are challenges that go along with having nothing. But the burden and the worry over how you're going to protect and keep the things that you have are much less. There's a movement aptly named called the Dinks. Dual income, no kids. Where people my age, mostly a millennial thing, I'm old for a millennial, brag about all the things they can do because they've chosen to avoid children. And so I can go out to the bar on Friday night, and I don't have to worry about a babysitter. And they brag about this stuff, like see how much better my life is because I don't have anything in it.
No. I'm just going to throw this in because it just popped into my head. This is how we feel. This is how we feel about pets.
No, and you know what? There are times.
Why? Why is that?
Once we send her away, like when you have to watch all the chickens and the dogs and the cats, it's like.
At the same time, I can just put the dogs in their room and go for the night. Because none of the pets are going to care. Can't put them.
Yeah. But also,
You
if
can
they're
try.
your age, they could have had kids at the same age you had kids, and then you don't need
That-
a babysitter for me.
That's true as well. Like,
And she takes care of the pets.
yeah.
End the deal.
But, so, I'm just saying, you could look at Jacob when he's probably 25, 30, 40. He's 40, I think that's what it says. And he leaves, and he's unmarried, has no children. He doesn't know what tomorrow is going to bring. But he has nothing to worry about. He only has to worry about where his own feet will take him. But now he has a whole city's worth of entourage, a village, so to speak, that is his responsibility. And on the other side of this river is his brother, whom the last time Jacob knew was going to kill him. And so it is true that often the more the Lord blesses us, the more we are tempted to worry and fret and fear. The more stuff I have, the more I worry about that stuff. When all my stuff was junk, I didn't worry much about it. The nicer stuff you have, the more you worry about it. I don't worry about trees scratching my 2005 Suburban. It can't make it any uglier. It's just what it is. Now he has responsibilities, and he's looking at that, And he's worried about that. And he's wondering, how can God make this work? How can God figure this out? And then in the midst of all of this, God attacks him. And he wrestles with him. And at some point in time, over this whole night of wrestling and struggling, Jacob realizes this isn't an ordinary man. He neither can overcome the other, although I said it's kind of like a dad wrestling with a 5-year-old. God wanted to destroy Jacob, he certainly could have. But Jacob realizes, I can't overcome this person, but this person is also not taking every advantage to hurt me. And so he just grabs on with all of his might, saying, I'm not letting go until you bless me. Which then leads to Norm's question. And, well, what is the blessing? And it starts with Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And then the Lord asks, what is your name? And he says, Jacob, which meant heel grabber. And this wrestler renames Jacob and says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have fought with God and men, and you have won. What is the importance of naming? I'll get to your question. We're going to take the long one. What's the importance of naming?
Meaning,
Okay, it adds meaning.
Maybe it's helping him look long term.
Okay. When God speaks, what happens? Oh, we would hope. When God speaks, what happens? His word comes true. So God speaks and it is. And when you look at creation, God calls the light day and the darkness night. He calls the dry places land, and he calls the waters the sea. He calls the greater light and the lesser light and the stars. God gives names to these things, and that is what they are. His name sets the boundary for things so that they serve the purpose which God intended them for. Take another step. God didn't name all the animals. Who names the animals? Adam. And what's it say after Adam names the animals? It says, whatever he said is the name. That is the name. God gives a little, that's like a glimpse at the image of God there. That what Adam says is what that thing is. When we name something, we are assigning meaning to it. We are trying to capture the reality. So Romeo's not quite right. That a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Is it Juliet who says it? It's been a long time since I've read Romeo. Because the name is capturing what the purpose and the reality and what this thing is for. And so the name needs to fit. And that is a power that God does give to human beings, that we can name things. And it is important that we use our language well. Especially, I think, today with our postmodernism, where language is being manipulated for evil ways. To use our language well is good. So God says Jacob, which is the name that Isaac and Rebekah named him as the heel grabber, because that's what he was doing when he came out, that God decides, I'm going to rename him. And what does God say his name is? What is the reality? Okay, and what's that mean?
Fought with God.
He fought with God and men, and he had won. So in a way, God is saying, my blessing is your very nature is one who struggles and wins. And then Jacob asks, what is your name? And God says, well, A, you already know my name. And B, what's more important than me speaking my name now is that I have given you a blessing. And so then what do we think the blessing is? Okay, it starts with the name. But then it adds, then he blessed him there.
I'm thinking of a promise of God's presence, God's protection, legacy.
I would, no, this is me going from context of the book of Genesis, and it will apply it too. How many times did God repeat the same blessing to Abraham? At least 4, I think. 2 major times, and then a couple of times that are kind of extra. He gives the same blessing to Isaac at least twice. Isaac blesses Jacob, and then shortly after that, Jacob sees the stairway to heaven where God says, see, I send down my blessing upon you. And Jesus says, I am the stairway by which God comes down to bless you. But God also proclaims to Jacob that I will bless you, I will be with you, I will multiply you and make your name great in the land, and you will come back to this place. Given that context, what do you think the blessing is that God gives Jacob?
Israel.
I would say it's the same blessing. I will be your shield, your very great reward, God told Abraham. I will make your name great. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. And in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And then he could also add, and this land will be the land of your people. Why would Jacob need that same blessing? Hadn't he received enough blessing? Was the blessing of Isaac obsolete? was the blessing at Bethel, where Jacob saw heaven open in front of him. Was that not enough? Why repeat a blessing again?
Emphasis and to refresh people's memories.
Ah.
Forever remember our blessing.
Jacob, you're about to cross this river. On the other side is Esau. You've been terrified, and I've shown you what struggle looks like. Never forget, I will bless you. How many times do we need to hear God's promise?
How many hours are there in the day?
One more time. I think it's Martin Luther who said, I need to hear God's forgiveness every week or every day because every day I forget it. It's kind of his argument for the Lord's Supper, too. I need to receive this blessing from God each week because every week I sin and I need it again.
And sometimes familiar things make the most impact.
Yeah.
Like sometimes
And to
just
hear it
repeating
repeated, yeah.
over and over again. But we've done so many times in that situation.
And along those lines, the word makes it impact on us certain times in certain places in certain ways more fully than in others. There are times when a certain illustration in a sermon might be just what you needed that day. And if you think about that illustration, you can almost picture yourself back in the pew again, hearing it. Or you were struggling with a certain thing and you opened up your Bible and it was the exact right passage. All of God's word is useful, but there are times when it's like, God must have sent me to that page of the Bible. Even though I'm reading through the whole Bible and I'm just going page after page, for whatever reason, that was the exact thing I needed to hear at that time. And isn't it then that that passage sticks with you for weeks, months, years later? Like, when you go through another struggle, even if it's not the same struggle, your mind goes back to that one passage that you needed at that one point in time. Jacob at Bethel, where he sets up the pillar, here at the Jabbok River, even his limp, Abraham with the dust of his feet and the stars in the sky. God writes his promises all the way throughout our lives so that no matter what, we can't forget it in a way. And when we need it, that blessing is there. What are your other thoughts or comments on Jacob wrestling with God?
Was I'm going to forget if it wasn't for the generation.
I think so. You know,
That is fine.
yeah. Rarely, this is more of a guy thing, but probably some women might too, but guys are often proud of their battle scars. Even if this is when I was an idiot, but I survived being an idiot. But especially when I did something hard, and this happened, and I overcame anyway. Or I just survived by the grace of God. You know, and there are different ways that people look at those things, you know. I've been working with various people who have endured hurt. And they want that hurt to go away, or they think that, you know, it's going to get better. And the only way I can think of it now is some hurts, whether it's external or even just a hurtful word, something that somebody close did to you, the real hurts, the things that go deep into your heart, they end up a little bit like shrapnel. You know, people talk about, well, there's not that many people who say this, but there's still a bit of German in me down here in my hip, because it's more work, it would do more damage to remove that little piece of metal than just to leave it in there. You know, there's still a little bit of the Viet Cong in my leg over here, or in my shoulder, or in my back, and they just leave it in there. And for the most part, you know, it might ache a little bit now and then, but you don't notice it. But then every once in a while, you bend the wrong way, you twist, you tear, just, you know, you reach a little bit too far and it rubs something the wrong way. And, oh, that hurts. And it reminds you of that struggle and that hurt. And we might wish that it didn't. But that is a little bit of what this life is sometimes, that it's full of hurt. And there's two ways that a person can look at it. They can get mad and bitter and blame God, how could you let this happen to me? Or you can see it as a reminder of God's grace and His love, that, yeah, I hurt. But God got me. God continues to sustain me when that comes up. So I think that's what the limp does. And Jacob could certainly remember that in some ways his own stupidity brought him to that. His own foolishness, his own pride brought him to the bank of that river. But at the same time, even through his own foolishness, God's goodness was there, even in the midst of the worst struggle of his life. Other thoughts or questions? Jacob wrestles with God. I'll maybe add one last little passing thought. Did Jacob seek out a contest with God? Every once in a while, we seem to think that we need to invent our own struggle. And especially our own struggle with God. Like, I need to do this thing, and I need to do it. And we should be very careful about that. God will place struggles in our lives. God gets to choose our crosses. We should not try to invent our own cross. Bear what God, and I'll say it this way too. Bear the cross God gives you to bear, because often when we invent our own cross, it can be to avoid the cross that God actually wants us to carry. Or it can be an excuse to say that God isn't doing what he should be doing. So we're creating our own struggle in faith because we've decided we need to struggle to make something happen or to do something that God hasn't told us is necessary in our lives. And so we take up a cross that God didn't give. Because we think, well, I should be struggling. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Well, God doesn't say that. So God will give you your own crosses. We don't need to invent one. Other thoughts?
So, any of us still doesn't answer the question that we started with now.
Well, God said.
If you were to physically introduce Jacob,
At least that's how I read. Jacob was left alone, and he wrestled with a man there until daybreak. I
Doesn't necessarily seem contrary. Doesn't seem to fit with his history. He tries to avoid them most of the time.
But ends up starting with anybody.
he does seem to depend more on his words. Hi, Shauna.
hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing good.
Other thoughts, questions, or comments?
I guess I had always pictured Jacob by himself now at the, about to cross over because he sent his family and everything away. So where did the man come from? He must have wondered.
Ah.
Suddenly appeared.
And not to allegorize too much, but since in the Old Testament in general, when God takes on human likeness to interact with people, we usually proclaim that that is the pre-incarnate Christ, that that's the second person who takes on flesh to appear. And now we don't want to get into too much of the mystery of the Trinity that we're dividing the Godhead or anything like that. But in general, that's how we see that. For evidence, you can go to Jacob's ladder. Like Jesus says, you will see the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. We see Jesus do this from time to time, too. Where Jesus says hard things that make people go, oh, I'm not so sure about this. And in our sermon text today, the people come to follow Jesus, and the first thing he says is, you're coming to me for the wrong reason. You're just looking to fill your bellies. You go, Jesus, take the win. They're there. Take the win, Jesus. But instead, he kind of socks him in the face. The crowds rush up to him and he bops him in the nose. You know what? Or, the rich young man. What must I do to be saved? And Jesus says, oh, go sell everything. Give it to the poor and then come follow me. Couldn't it just said, believe in me? Trust in me? Something, all the nice fluffy things we say to people when we want them to come to church. So, sometimes Jesus bops you in the face. Just the way it is. Sometimes God knows what we need, and sometimes it is a wrestling. You look like you have something to ask here. Okay. Any final questions? I think we've run Jacob wrestling with God pretty much as thoroughly as I'm capable of. So I will continue with the events of Jacob's life. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with 400 men. Jacob divided the children into groups with Leah and Rachel and with the two maids. He put the maids and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph at the end. He himself crossed over the stream with the others and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, hugged him around his neck, and kissed him. They both wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children and asked, "Who are these people with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given to your servant." Then the maids came forward with their children, and they bowed low. Leah and her children also came forward and bowed low. After them, Joseph came forward with Rachel, and they bowed low. Esau said, "What did you mean by this whole camp that I met? To gain favor in the sight of my Lord." Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what is yours." Jacob said, "No, if I have found favor in your sight, please accept the gift from my hand. Because when I saw your face, it was like seeing the face of God. And now that you have accepted me, please accept the gift that I brought you, because God has dealt graciously with me, because I have everything I need." And he urged him, and he accepted it. Esau said, "Let us get going on our journey. I will lead the way for you." Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are still young, and my flocks and herds are nursing their young. And if the herdsmen drive them too hard, even in one day, all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord go ahead of his servant. I will follow slowly, at the right pace for the livestock and the right pace for the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Esau said, "Please let me leave some of my people with you." But he said, "Why? Just let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau set out that day on his way back to Seir. Jacob traveled to Succoth, and he built his house there. He made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. He then returned from Paddan Aram. Jacob came in peace to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, and he camped in front of the city. He bought a piece of land where he pitched his tent from the descendants of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver. He erected an altar there, and he called the place El Elohe Israel, meaning God, the God of Israel, or the God of Israel is mighty. El can mean both God or mighty, depending on the context. So, what are your questions, or what stands out to you?
How far would you guess Jacob had traveled and Esau had traveled to get to their meeting place? If it was going to take a while for them to get back to Esau's.
I'd have to look. Which I did not.
I wish they had a map in their Bibles.
I don't think there's one in the EHVs. There might be one, but remind me towards the end of class, and maybe I'll have time to look at my Bible atlas. So, for context, obviously Jacob can see Esau. When Jacob crosses the Jabbok River, he can see Esau and his 400 men approaching. So, a mile or two. But how far it is to Seir and to Succoth, I don't know. Pronounce it in the more Hebrew way, Sukkot. Other questions? or comments? What stands out to you?
Well, it looks like he changed his mind on where he was gonna end up.
Yeah.
He gets partway there, then he stops, buys land, builds a house. And
Or
then
he
before that, they were gonna go slowly until,
What do you make of that?
Not quite trusting yet. Not sure that this forgiveness is real.
Yeah, that's what I would kind of say is Jacob remains Jacob.
And he wasn't going to let Esau leave any people with him when Esau returned.
That, you know, and some of that's just prudence too. Like, I don't want to be dependent on my brother for his benevolence. Could also maybe make the note. What do they say about good fences? Or what happened when Abraham and Lot were both in the same area and they were blessed? When there's not enough space, conflict can breed even with the best of intentions. And so you could say Jacob's simply being wise in, let's not push our luck here. We're still different people. You know, time has healed the wound. There is reconciliation and forgiveness. But the things that made it hard for us to get along probably have not fully gone away. Even with a husband and wife sometimes, isn't it nice to have a little space that is yours? A place you can get away for a little while. I mean, not me. I'm saying I've heard that about other
Yeah, people.
relationships. That
Good save.
sometimes.
That's why there are garages.
Oh, that's why they were voted for.
That too.
Well, we had a good thing going.
No,
Figure it out yet?
there's a good balance there, isn't there? You know, it's amazing that my dad was able to live across the street from his parents my whole life. But in general, my grandparents kept to themselves. They didn't walk over unannounced for no reason until much later in their retirement when my sister and I were out of the house, and then my grandpa would walk over when my dad was in the garage and they'd just kind of hang out for a little while. They'd walk back. That was fun. But in general, you know, you can only be around some people for so long before you get a little tested. I use spouses because even that happens with the people that you care about the most at some point. I just need my own time and my own space and my own place for a little while. So how much more for Jacob and Esau, who are different men, very different men, with a very interesting history. Why push it? So even if you take things in the best possible way. What other things stand out to you? What do you, oh, go ahead, Gene. Gene, you first.
Just, there's no indication here that Esau had any recognition of God's presence or thinking back to his parents' promise. I just was wondering.
Not in the same way that God did with Laban. We aren't told. The only recognition we have is Esau realizes that Rebekah despised his Hittite wives. And so he goes and finds a wife from the Ishmaelites. Which doesn't seem like a great solution to our minds, but he recognized that, oh, having unbelieving wives has been a thorn in my parents' side. So you have that little bit of recognition. And his attitude when he comes home and the blessing is gone, recognizes that God gets to bless and there is power in blessing. So you have little hints. But if you also look at history, the Edomites never seem to reconcile themselves with God's plan. I believe Sheila's been reading through the Minor Prophets. I know Katie would often say, what's with all of these curses of Edom? And, Edom is mentioned over and over again in the Minor Prophets, and never favorably. So in another respect, Esau never fully contented himself with God's plan. And that he carried that bitterness, they carried that bitterness with them as a nation even throughout history.
So in verse 18, that Jacob returned from, I don't know how to pronounce that.
Padan Aram.
Is there any reference that he was there to begin with? That he
Haran.
was able to return to?
That's Haran.
That's what?
Haran. That's where Laban is. That's what the region is called. So Haran's the city, Padan Aram is the region.
Okay.
Good clarification. How do you picture Jacob's face when Esau hugs him? Yeah, you can almost picture his face going, and then that moment of relief and release.
I almost picture him kind of going stiff when Esau first hugs him.
Yeah, stiff and eyes wide, and then, oh. This is everything I had hoped for. Could we talk about, is it manly to cry or not? Is that worth a mention? I think it probably is. It's important for men, and especially young men and boys, to learn to control their emotions. Because a man ruled by his emotions is a dangerous person. Look at our inner cities. Lots of young men who are never taught to control their basic emotional impulses. However, controlling your emotion is not the same as having no emotion. It's okay to show that emotion. And we see that over and over again from the Bible where men weep together.
Jesus wept.
Jesus wept. But, you know, when Paul leaves the Ephesians, they all weep over each other. And as a good German, I think, ugh. And yet, perhaps it's worth recognizing that maybe that's a fault in me, not a fault in thee. No matter what the manly commentators on the internet want to say about what it means to be. The other note is, when you trust in God's blessings, you can be generous, can't you? And you can be unafraid to give freely, whether it's for a purpose, like Jacob's got certainly the purpose of making sure that Esau holds nothing against him, to try to even the score with his brother a little bit. But also, just to show his brother, I've been blessed and I want to share my joy and my blessing with you. So when God blesses us, we can afford to be generous, and that's worth remembering. Once again, Jacob buys land because God's people recognize that no one should be able to say that they gave God's people anything. Because God promised this, so we're going to show that God gave it to us. Other than that, any other further questions in the last 30 seconds? I will go check my Bible atlas, and I'll just leave it open to the page so you can get a good geography lesson if you want. Yes. As long as the things that there's a chance that Sukkot and Seir aren't